So I wanted to do some different conversations on design because I just found myself with all these questions on current tech and current cultural developments and just really getting that analysis paralysis about moving forward with all these different options and decisions. And so I was just kind of like, oh, I want to call so-and-so. I want to talk to so-and-so. There's just different people I respect in the industry that I was like, I want to just get them on the phone. And so then I was like, yeah, I could just like record, make that more public because I'm sure other people are kind of wondering about these things. I was doing the book launch, and that's all about trying to shape how we think about digital design. Moving forward from that, how are other people thinking about how to think about the future, how designers are adapting to the present and adapting their processes. So the general idea was just 5 questions on design futures, like trying to keep it short, trying to keep it to 30 minutes. We'll see. This is the first one.
I'm honored.
Yeah, it was perfect because talking to you in the park was really fun after our conversation about how generative AI is changing how we think about things or have to think about things. I just kept chewing on that. And you said one thing that stuck in my mind, that you were trying to forget everything you learned about design process and then rethink your process entirely. So does that still feel true? Like,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Like I wake up every morning and I sit down on my computer and I have to think, okay, what is it that I want to do today? And the things that feel familiar to me, I have to actively like beat back at that in my brain and be like, no, don't do the thing that you think you know. Don't do the thing that you've done for a decade. Think about if you were starting fresh from the beginning today, if you were a student just entering the industry, how would you do it there?
Yeah.
Because I'm so afraid of becoming ossified in my processes and my perspective, and especially as the world is changing more and more. I think that it's so important to very actively push back against that instinct to just do what feels familiar and has worked in the past. Be like, what got me here won't get me there, won't be the thing that can keep me sharp in the future.
If you look at your process a couple years ago, 3 years ago or something, what did it look like then? And then what has dropped, what has added, what patterns have happened?
It's hard for me to separate my process from 3 years ago versus myself, like who I was as a human being from 3 years ago.
Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago, I was much more of a services mindset, working with clients or working with stakeholders as someone who was trying to help execute on other people's vision and needs. And to that end, as a designer, I would bring my craft, my ability to move shapes around in the appropriate way on a computer or make things clear to users to communicate a certain message on behalf of someone else. And then someone else would bring the goals, the mission, the message. And then another person would bring the ability to like make all of this real, right? To be able to build that and deploy it to users. And then there might be another person who would be able to like talk to the end customers and, get the word out about the product.
So that sounds like that typical tech breakdown of like there's design, there's product as the strategy, there's engineering, and maybe you even bring in research or data science for more color, but it's very segmented.
Yeah, it's very segmented, and also design always existed in service of someone else, right?
Yeah.
There was no design without all the counterparts that you're working with. And that is true outside of tech as well. In more traditional, let's say graphic design, design always exists in the context of having a client to work with or
Yeah.
a larger organization to support that work. And now what I've tried to do as a designer and also as a person is to stop answering to what other people want. Not in a I won't do anything that other people say way, but basically what I've realized is now the tooling and the technology has gotten good enough that you could go a lot farther on your own. So as a designer, what that means in terms of process is before, where my process was mostly stuck in Figma, I'm able to use these generative AI tools to write boilerplate code, to come up with placeholder assets for anything that I'm making in order to communicate more clearly what it is that I want to say, or in order to communicate more clearly with any other creative partners as well, different ideas that I have. I think the biggest change has been the code side of things in collapsing the number of different people required to make a project real. Then I can kind of just be the ideas person, builder person, the person who gives an idea shape and also helps to make it real. Whereas before it was like a product person, a a designer and an engineer and then other people as well. Like because of all the better tooling and infrastructure that's out there now, it can all just be kind of collapsed to one person.
Yeah, we talked about how it's like the olden days when you could be like, I design and I also did the front end and the back end, and you just used to do it all yourself. And maybe we can get back to some of that where it's more of what typically only prototyping can be of like, hey, I made this janky thing, but it's terrible code. And you studied computer science, so you
Yeah.
probably have more fluency than a lot of design.
Well, okay, maybe I'm still in the prototyping stage where everything is still really janky code, but it's something that can work with actual users. I am still working with friends on all my self-directed projects, but the barrier to getting started, to getting something out there is just so much lower now. The one thing I forgot to touch on was beyond just generative AI for design specifically. I think in the last decade, what we've seen is this interface of a smartphone screen really reach maturity, right? And also same with desktop screens. Overall, the patterns that we've used have kind of settled into something familiar that works for broad section of whatever it is that we want to make. And the tooling for that, the resources that it takes to build something like that is so much better now, so much faster and easier to create something familiar.
Yeah.
And we don't need to reinvent the wheel all the time. The analogy that comes to mind is, let's say you're inventing the first book and you're still trying to figure out what books should look like. How big should they be? What should the pages look like? How should they look? And like what goes in the pages and how should that be laid out? And what direction should it go in? And you can imagine in the beginning, if you've never seen a book before and the rest of society hasn't seen a book before, you're probably getting all sorts of interesting and different books, but then after a while, it kind of settles into this certain broadly agreed upon form factor. And then you don't necessarily need to constantly be reinventing the book form factor. And sometimes you can for certain creative effects, but you don't need to. And everyone kind of has an understanding like this is what a book looks like.
I feel that too. So now product design at a professional level is often creating systems. So you're not reinventing the world. You might be trying to differentiate at a key moment, but you're not going to differentiate on every single aspect like you used to. Like those early days, we were like literally building the internet and it was like, oh, what should it be? And now it feels much more like we're optimizing and maintaining and like connecting a lot of things. And so it is new tools, bleeding edge tech where there's still kind of like, well, what should an AI interface look like? Obviously, everything now is a chatbot, but is that the best? Derek Schultz is doing a class, UX, UI, AI. So I'm going to take that next month because that feels like we do need to figure out some patterns and guardrails and all those sorts of things. But yeah, it's a different era. And I'm curious also, so when you talk about process and having more tools that you can go further on your own, is that true of both your client work as well as your side projects? Do you feel like you're still exploring a lot independently? How's your client work shaping up?
So I've deliberately chosen to work with early stage startups making AI related products. And AI related could mean a lot of different things, whether they're training entirely new AI models and need to rethink what types of interfaces work with those models, or they're taking off the shelf AI models and thinking about new products that could be made, incorporating these models, but the model isn't the centerpiece. I just started working with a new client recently, and they're working with AI models and building a new product around it. And I was trying to design in Figma because they already had some stuff in Figma. And I was like, this makes no sense to be designing in Figma with static fake data with no sense of what the shape of the model actually is. So what I keep wanting to do is just jump directly to code or even just work with a very janky interface for the model just so I can see how the model actually behaves and responds to my input. Like in the past decade, whenever people brought up designing with real data, it was very often in the context of, let's say, social apps, right? Where the main experience of the product is not necessarily the interface itself, it's the other people on it and how they behave and how you behave with them. And so I think with AI products, the main experience of the product is how you're interacting with this other non-human, non-sentient being with this computer that can now talk back at you in certain ways, right? And whatever the interface is has to encourage certain types of interaction between you and the computer, or highlight the strengths of the model that you're working with, or work around the limitations. it becomes kind of impossible to evaluate those trade-offs without actually constantly working with that raw model itself.
Yeah, I've heard from people doing like hackathons for working with models, the output you get is often so initially poor, or so you really have to see it. And then in my head, the visual that's happening is that old Airbnb demo where they're like, you can sketch and then the interface builds it. But for you, I picture this as like you're sketching and then you're coding over here. And this high fidelity mock-up land is not super useful. And I think when you get to a certain level in design, you can do some of that in your head. You've seen enough components that you can visualize. Does that feel like enough for you right now? Are you sketching? Am I assuming that? Or are you just really deep in the code and that's enough?
I go back and forth, right? Sometimes it's important for me to step away from the code and just do high level sketches really quickly, but I'm not taking it to like a super high fidelity with like perfect pixel polish the way I used to. Used to really matter to me, but now I do not prioritize that anymore. I think now I'm just working out different ideas through sketches in Figma, potentially looking at it with other people just to explain my ideas, and then jumping to code as quickly as possible. Code is also just AI written. Usually it's just ChatGPT asking ChatGPT, hey, I want to build this thing. Can you help me scaffold this up? And it'll do a pretty good job of it.
Yeah.
And
so you're working mostly in their playgrounds, like forking those. Replit is one I've heard people are doing a lot
so
of
I'm
work in.
working in very often just like straight up production code bases, not like immediately, but I have been pushing to production in these startup environments. I'll have the code base locally on my computer and then start modifying it locally and run it locally and see, hey, does this feel right? When I have this interface and this model, how does that feel? Because to stay too long trying to optimize the design of the layout in Figma land, I very quickly realized that once I take it to code, it often falls apart.
And what falls apart? What are the parts where it breaks? If you made a list.
So one example where it fell apart was earlier this year, I was working with a startup that did image generation, and they were training a completely new model for generating images. So it's not like I could use an off-the-shelf model like DALL-E or Midjourney and just be like, oh yeah, it'll just approximately work like this. Their model behaved differently. The way it responded to your prompts was it accepted different types of inputs. It accepted image inputs and text inputs, and then the outputs were very, very spiky. Basically, some of it would be what you were looking for, and then a lot would not be what you're looking for. And so how do we make the interface conducive to that, right?
Designing for the fail states, designing for the imperfect.
And designing for like, how do we make sure that you don't get constantly disappointed? If we had an experience, let's say in ChatGPT, where it gives you one image for your request every time, which is how the current state of ChatGPT with DALL-E 3 works. I type in, hey, can you generate me an image of a panda? And it gives you one picture of a panda. And you're like, no, can you change it to a panda in the woods? And then it'll give you that. With this model that I was working with, the chances that you're going to get something good enough on the first try was a much greater gamble. You'll either get something like really, really close to what you wanted, that's like incredible and way better than any of the other models, or you'll get something that's much more disappointing. So there's a lot more variance.
That's really interesting. Because that makes me think of the whole user journey, user flow, where in Figma, you're like, there's these steps. It takes 6 steps to be onboarded. But you're saying a lot of times the results means it's going to take another 10 steps to even get to step 1, because you can't just expect that this is going to result.
Yeah, exactly. So that was kind of impossible to design for without actually testing the model itself and be like, oh, hey, this is my experience as a user trying to get a good result. And it can be really frustrating if I'm only seeing one image at a time, or even if I'm only seeing, let's say, 4 images at a time, then the workflow should be different.
It's not a typical process. We don't know what to expect yet. It's a newer medium, and it's so dependent on the model. My sister-in-law does data science. She's a consultant and was saying that right now, a lot of their clients are setting up these models, seeing what they can do. And I was like, oh yeah, and then it's going to be like the web where 5 years from now, everybody's got the models and it's going to be maintaining and refining and connecting them. But right now it is like, we don't know what we're going to get. And it does really vary depending on a lot of things.
I think it's also, it's not like this is a completely new problem, right? It's like trying to design a data visualization without having the data. That feels strange. Or trying to design a very content-driven website without having the content would also be very strange. And so with this new class of products, if you try to design a way to interact with an AI without actually constantly working with the AI itself, then that would be very very strange.
That's super helpful. So you're definitely at the advanced level, being in the industry, having background, and then having refined your skills. But as an educator, if you were teaching the 101 for people that are like, I have never touched a model, how would I get started? How would you tell students to get started?
Oh man. I mean, thank you for saying that I'm advanced, but I actually don't feel that I'm very advanced. I feel like a newcomer to this, just like everyone else.
Perspective.
All I've been doing is just talking to ChatGPT and be like, yo, I want to build this. How do I do it? And then the great thing is that there are a lot of off-the-shelf models that you can just start plugging into and playing around with, right? There's ChatGPT and the APIs there, obviously. There's Replicate, which is a service that hosts a bunch of open source models that you can just access really easily through API. The most prohibitive things right now, I think, are cost and technical literacy. Cost is a big barrier because it's just really expensive to run these AI models. So even if you want to test something out, play around with it, understand the contours of it. If you're like a student and have a low budget, I actually don't know of too many resources for a student there. Maybe there are student plans. There's, of course, always the free version of ChatGPT.
Yeah.
With the technical literacy side, just talking to ChatGPT and asking for boilerplate code can get you really, really far. That's just what I've been doing. Beyond that, there's always the fundamentals, right? Just thinking about how the product works, talking to other people who are using the product, developing your own intuition of how the product works.
Yeah.
All of that still stays true.
And then really stupid question. So are you still working in the typical developer environment of like, I'm coding in Sublime and then I'm pushing to whatever Git, or is it you're working in these in-browser environments?
I'm still just working in that more traditional setup. I use Cursor, which is a text editor IDE. There's a new IDE for just bringing in a panel of ChatGPT into your code editor. It's basically like VS Code, which was a previous very commonly used editor. And literally they just have another feature added on to let you talk to ChatGPT directly within the same program as editing your code. So then you don't have to tab back and forth all the time. And it also adds in context from the rest of your code base. And so I use that. I haven't used the in-browser. I have used Replit for some prototypes, but not for production work. And still just editing code locally, pushing it up to a branch in GitHub, having other people play around with it.
Okay, super helpful. And then the other thing that starts to come up for me is when you're trying to plan a project or you're trying to sell a project to a client or whatever and write this project plan for this brand new thing. Is there any way to do it besides just day rates or hourly or, just time? Because there's so much exploration. It's really hard to predict how long things are going to take.
Yeah, I have always done hourly or time-based billing because I think for product design, it's just really hard to tell what the shape of it's be. I've always done like an initial 2-week trial period with a new client, just so both sides can feel out the vibes. And I'm just trying to do my best work, but also they can get a sense of like, oh, is this what they're looking for? Do we vibe? It's always been like a 2-week period of either side can drop out if they're feeling it. But I don't think I've ever had the trial period not work out. So it's always been hourly billing for me. And I'll be continuing with that in the future. I think for me, because both sides can pause at any time, I like the flexibility. I think it might be different depending on what your priorities are for your own freelance practice.
Yeah, same. I've always felt most comfortable. For me, half days or days are really nice chunks of time. I just have to make sure if I'm doing hourly that I'm not flipping along a lot of projects. And then, what if I'm like cooking dinner and thinking about the project, that kind of stuff. So for me, I like to chunk it a little bit bigger just to like calm myself down. And then what about the collaboration? Do you feel like it's all day, every day? Do you feel like it's still in spurts for reviews? How has that changed, if at all?
For collaboration, every day I'm working on a client project, I'm talking to the client. Or every day I'm working on my own projects. Well, I am working with friends and collaborators on all of my own projects as well. There, I might not be chatting every single day, but you hop on Discord or FaceTime if we need to talk through something, and we do project management in a really lightweight way in Google Docs. So far, nothing too different from before. I guess one thing, I don't know if this is too different from before, but all of these collaborations, the bulk of it has been remote with some in-person time, just to be able to generate a lot of ideas really quickly and also keep that energy going.
So kind of a workshop-y vibe for the in-person stuff.
For the in-person stuff, not even as structured as workshopping. making sure to check in person at least like once a month or once every other month if possible, just to get to all those nebulous in between points and conversations that can't usually fit into a call or a Slack message.
You're also someone who walks that edge between like artist and designer. So you're doing a lot of fun side projects, but you're maintaining these quote unquote marketable skills. So do you find yourself actively balancing that? Is it just something that's kind of intuitive at this point? Some people block time or have a strategy or just follow their heart. How does it play out for you?
I'm still figuring this out. I really want to work for myself and build products for myself and have that be my primary source of income. I'm not there yet. The side projects, I don't know if they're necessarily side projects because I do view them as very core to my practice. My self-initiated, self-directed projects are more of a stepping stone for me to understand the ins and outs of how to build something in a self-directed way. I just haven't asked for money for any of them yet. I guess that's the next thing I have to learn is how to ask people for money for all these things that I figured out how to build. And then the client work, there's a couple different things that it brings to my practice. One is just some financial income to help with all this investment that I'm making into my own projects to help make sure that I'm not just completely digging into savings all the time. And also, I think it helps with time boxing my self-directed work. Because if I'm just left with blank space to do my own self-directed work, sometimes I can spiral. It really depends on the phase I'm in, but sometimes they're just like, let something drag on for way too long. Whereas what I've noticed with starting to take on just a little bit of client work part-time was like, okay, this actually helps give me some artificial deadlines to structure my time around so that I can time box things more. The risk, I think, is of the client work taking over all my time, taking over too much of my time and energy. I want to make sure that I can preserve my own creative pursuits.
Yeah, if the client project starts to be a really tough one, then even if you have a lot of creative time, you're basically just recovering. Or it can be not so tough, but it takes all my hours. So yeah, it's a tricky thing to balance.
Yeah. I feel like I was potentially a little unfair to my client projects in describing that, but I think the really great thing is to be able to work on client projects that also help me advance my craft and my understanding of the state of art, because everything is changing so quickly that if I were just sitting in a room by myself trying to keep up, like I wouldn't be able to, right? It's so much easier to keep up when there's a bunch of other people also working towards that goal or making new advancements themselves, and then they could just tell me. And then I can very immediately incorporate that into my projects in a way that if I were just working through my own backlog of self-directed projects, I might not incorporate that as quick. It really helps me stay sharp.
It's like being at a good co-working space, like your SVA class, I think was like designed for the real world, remembering that real world, all those constraints, all those different personalities, and also just the fun of it. My friend Tom Critchlow just launched the SEO MBA course, and then he just did a more general one called the new MBA. And he's doing well with these online courses, but he's like, I still want to consult. I like consulting. There can be this ideal of, oh, I'm just going to work all by myself and do all my own stuff, but that's lonely and not as stimulating as actually having somebody else being like, well, no, what about this constraint? So yeah, that balance is something I enjoy as well. I did these sabbaticals to finish my book and it was good, but it was also that thing, I forget whose law it is, that work expands to fill the time available. And so when you start getting busier, you actually are more efficient because you're just like, I'm not going to let that take a whole day. That gets 2 hours because that's what I have.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's balance.
It forces better self-discipline. It makes me not take the time for granted.
Do you see yourself going like startup route, trying to get funding? Do you feel like you're trying to develop software as a service models? Do you feel like any of that is speaking to you, or you're still kind of early stage?
This is the big question that I've been kind of wrapping my head around for the past year. For 2023, after I left my job, I told myself I would give myself a year or two. I had enough savings and I was deliberately planning for this. I was not going to prioritize taking on client projects that brought in income. I wanted to focus on developing my own skills, coming up with my own ideas, working towards building my own things. And now that year has passed and I want to think about now what is next for me. I really want to be working for myself, but I also really want to be working with friends and people whose company I enjoy, right? Just working by myself can be very lonely and kind of defeats the purpose. so much of what I enjoy about work is the social aspect. So that part is really important to me. And I'd love to have consistent full-time collaborators to do it with. Does that look like a VC funded startup? I don't know. I have a lot of reservations about the world of VC funding. I'm still kind of evaluating what my priorities are right now. But I suppose right now my ambitions are to work on things that feel interesting and ambitious and hard with my friends. And whatever it takes for me to do that, then I'll make it happen.
There's so many opportunities that you can't predict exactly. There's this weird like sniff test that is hard to plan.
Exactly. And I am very optimistic that it is easier than ever to just start, a business on your own without needing to take in additional capital from outside investors. I would love to retain that sort of control over my businesses. Because if I didn't want to work for anyone else, then being a VC funded founder is like you're still answering to the VCs.
For sure. So it really is like, what's the commitment you're having to make? What are the agreements you're making with each type of thing? If you build a software product, then you've created this thing that people expect to use and become dependent on, and you're committed to that. So what kind of commitment are you willing to make to a single project or multiple projects or different relationships?
Yeah, I mean, watch me turn around and become like a VC founder right after this. Oh my God, I just completely disavow everything. I'm still just kind of figuring all of that out. I want to see, I just want to see where next year takes me.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like all the different consulting you've done, you've got kind of an interesting perspective right now. Is there anything that's bubbling up for you? Any interesting trends or patterns you're seeing from your lens, working with a lot of different startups and AI companies?
I think the thing that surprised me this year was things feel like they're changing a lot more slowly than I expected.
Interesting.
In terms of processes and what the industry is talking about, it feels like everyone's in this weird holding pattern. I mean, I speak from the perspective of at the beginning of this year when I was like playing around with ChatGPT and I was like, holy crap, this is just going to change the way computers work and we are in for a wild, weird new world. I was making a bet on myself that in the next 5 years, the way software gets built will just be so dramatically different that I have to throw away everything I know and start from scratch. And so I've been doing that. And regardless of whether or not that change actually comes to pass, I'm very happy that I'm doing it because this is also helping me to master my craft and advance it. But I pause and I look up around and I'm like, wait, everyone's still kind of working in the same familiar way that I'm used to, at least in the design side. And what we're seeing, of course, is the really rough job market right now. It's more of a transition period in terms of even just availability of work for the industry. But yeah, a lot of things still look very familiar, whereas my own practices evolve so much that I'm curious if this is just a temporary thing or if I overestimated how quickly change would happen, or if there's going to be a split in terms of the types of processes that are being used at different types of companies, where maybe big companies stick with the older processes and new companies do something like totally weird and different, and it'll be harder and harder to bridge that gap. I don't know.
Yeah, I felt the same thing of like the holding pattern of the year. It was like a very good year to be on sabbatical. I talked to a recruiter who said they've seen like 25% of the inquiries for product designers that they did last year because the fears of a recession made everyone pause. With the new tech, people are again kind of pausing, being like, well, what's next? What's happening? So yeah, there's a little bit of hesitation. And then I think for larger companies, they have to cover the risks. I'm happy to see people taking the time to think through the ethical considerations and the risks and everything. Hopefully it's some better processes because it's a little slower than tech tends to go.
I think it's not necessarily about the way it's been incorporated into products so much as just how, in my view, what has been surprising is that there aren't more people modifying their processes already because of this.
Yeah. Well, the last of my 5 questions, I wanted to hear how you think about continuing to shape your education, who else you're following or learning from these days.
I actually have been looking towards a lot of history, a lot of the history of technological development and how it shaped culture and humanity. I think right now on the internet, there's just so much mimetic discourse. Everyone's just kind of saying the same things and they organize into their tribes, and it just doesn't feel very helpful for me. So I've been looking towards I've been studying the history of plastics, which has been really, really fascinating. And I view AI as kind of the digital equivalent to physical synthetic materials. Obviously, right now, plastics are a huge villain in our society, but they also are completely unavoidable, and they shaped the development of modern society. So I've been looking back towards the earlier stages of its development and being like, oh, how did people react then? And like, were they aware of it? And why did plastic spread? I've been looking towards that, and also obviously nuclear history as well. It's kind of funny, plastics and nuclear came up around the same time, and there were very different reactions towards it in society, right? Obviously, one is like very taboo, nuclear is very taboo, and plastic is everywhere. And I'm just kind of following that and seeing like, oh yeah, like what will AI turn out to be like? Other disruptive technologies, obviously printing press, industrial revolution, reading technological cultural criticism like Lewis Mumford. There's this book, American Plastic by Jeffrey Makel, that is incredible, highly recommend. Joseph Weizenbaum, who developed the first chatbot called Eliza, like this old computer program that pretended to be a therapist, and people were absolutely enthralled, even though all it did was just like repeat very basic questions back at the user. Like whatever the user typed in, and just like, oh, like if you say something about your father, the computer would just be like, oh, your father? And then the user would like keep checking. He wrote a book called, I'm trying to remember the name. Wait, hold on.
Well, I was going to ask if you'd read Tim Harford's new book, What We Get Wrong About Technology. Yeah, I saw him speak at the Mind the Product conference, and it's a lot of similar ideas. He mentioned plastics.
Oh, great. Because I haven't heard too much about people drawing that connection between plastics and AI, and I wanted to write something about it. I was like, I'm surprised more people aren't talking about this. So anyway, looking towards the history of technological development to see what we can learn there. Because even though this technology is new, humans are still the same. Humans are going to human. We're probably going to repeat a lot of the same mistakes, have a lot of the same patterns and reactions. So that can help me make sense of things when there's no other way to kind of make sense of what's going on right now.
That's spoken like a true designer, zooming out, seeing the patterns. Okay, cool. Anything else that's been on your mind lately?
It doesn't come to mind at the moment.
Okay. And then I didn't introduce all your awesome projects. Trash Baby, which is really fun and addictive, your AI image remixer that I've been playing with. And I got to see your AI poetry camera at Conference. And I loved that was that combination of, yes, the bleeding edge tech, but also these really cute physical device to humanize it and bring it to life. And then also really liked your pomo.chat to make the whole Pomodoro technique more social by synchronizing it all globally so you can all take a break together. That's so clever. Really excited to see all those. And then where can people find you online?
I am on TikTok at Kēlín.online, and I am on Twitter at Kēlín.online. And I reluctantly post to Instagram at Kēlín_online. I need to start a newsletter so that I can get off the big platforms.
Yeah, next independent project. Okay, well, thanks so much. I'll wrap that there.